You remember the exact moment the first $10,000 happened because it did not feel like a moment at all. It felt like a Tuesday. You're checking the brokerage app between meetings, standing in a stairwell because the elevator was taking too long, and you had 90 seconds before you had to be back at your desk pretending to care about a project status update. The number on the screen reads $10,014. You stare at it the way you'd stare at a parking ticket. Not thrilled, not devastated, just processing. 5 years. That's how long it took to get here. 5 years of a $25 automatic transfer that felt, for at least the first 18 months, like setting money on fire in a very slow, very legal way. 5 years of watching the number crawl up in increments so small they were basically imperceptible, the way a fingernail grows, the way you don't notice your kid getting taller until someone hands you an old photo. You go back to the meeting. Nobody asks why you were in the stairwell. Nobody would care if you told them. "I just crossed 10 grand in my brokerage account" is not a sentence that changes the temperature of a Tuesday status update. You sit back down. Someone is sharing their screen. It is, somehow, still about the Q3 timeline. Here's the thing you didn't understand at 24. Standing in a different stairwell, in a different building, setting up that first $25 transfer with the specific dread of someone signing something they haven't fully read. You thought the first $10,000 and the second $10,000 would take roughly the same amount of time. Same effort in, same time out. That felt like basic fairness. That felt like how math should work. Math, as it turns out, does not care about your sense of fairness. The first $10,000 was mostly you. Paycheck after paycheck, $25 here, occasionally $50 when you got a raise, and didn't immediately spend it on something that made you feel, briefly, like a person who had things figured out. You built that first 10 grand with your own hands, dollar by dollar, the way you'd build a brick wall if someone handed you 1 brick a week and told you to be patient about it. The second $10,000 took 8 months. You didn't work harder. You didn't get a giant raise. You didn't discover some secret stock that tripled overnight, because those don't actually exist outside of the group chat with your cousin who's really into crypto right now and has been about to make it back for 2 consecutive years. What happened is boring, and also, it turns out, the entire point. Somewhere in year 3, without you fully noticing, the account started making its own money. Not a lot. At first, it was almost embarrassing. $40 here, $60 there, dividends landing quietly like coins someone dropped and didn't bother picking back up. You'd see the deposit notification and think mildly, "Oh, that's nice," the way you'd react to finding a $5 bill in an old jacket pocket. Pleasant, not life-changing, not something you'd tell anyone about at a dinner party, mostly because nobody wants to hear about your dividends at a dinner party, a lesson you learned the hard way at your friend Priya's engagement party, where you brought it up unprompted and watched 3 separate conversations quietly relocate to the other side of the room. But the money didn't leave. That was the whole trick, if you can call something this unglamorous a trick. Every dividend bought more shares. Those new shares generated their own tiny dividends, which bought more shares, which generated more dividends. It's less like a strategy and more like a chain letter that's somehow not a scam, where the only person you're forwarding the letter to is yourself, 17 different times a year, in increments too small to notice until suddenly they're not. By month 6 of your 8-month sprint to the second $10,000, you were contributing the same $25, sometimes $50, exactly like before. But the account was also generating $80, $90, $110 a month on its own, quietly, without asking permission, without needing you to do anything except not panic sell during the 1 week the market dropped 4%, and your coworker Danny, who reads exactly 1 finance newsletter and has treated it as a personality trait ever since, sent you 3 unsolicited texts about getting out while you can. You did not get out while you could. You didn't do anything, actually, which took more discipline than doing something. In the same way, ignoring a text is somehow harder than replying to one. Danny, for what it's worth, did get out. He got back in 4 months later at a slightly higher price than he sold at, which he has not brought up since, and which you have therefore also never brought up, out of what you consider basic human kindness. There's a version of this story where you sound impressively disciplined, where you meditated on long-term thinking and quoted Warren Buffett unprompted at parties. That's not what happened. What happened is you set up the transfer once, forgot about it almost entirely, and got mildly annoyed every time you had to log in and remember your password, which, if you're honest, is a genuinely inconvenient amount of two-factor authentication for something that was supposedly changing your life. You almost stopped the transfer twice. Once during a slow month when rent went up $80 and you did the mental math on whether $25 less a month would meaningfully change your life, and once during a weekend trip you couldn't really afford, where canceling the automatic transfer felt, briefly, like the responsible adult version of finding loose change in the couch. Both times you opened the app to cancel it. Both times you got distracted by something else. A text, a show autoplaying, the specific and profound laziness of a Sunday evening, and never actually completed the cancellation. This is, it turns out, the entire secret, not willpower, inconvenience. The app made canceling annoying enough that doing nothing was easier than doing something, and doing nothing, for once in your financial life, was the correct move. You've thought about this since, more than you'd like to admit. How many of your actual good financial decisions were decisions at all, versus just things you were too tired or too lazy to undo? It's not a flattering theory. It also happens to be the one that fits the evidence. You did the math on your phone once, badly, sitting on the edge of your bed at 1 a.m. for reasons that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with not being able to sleep. If the first $10,000 took 5 years and the second took 8 months, how long would the third take? You didn't finish the calculation properly. You're not actually great at compound interest math in your head, a fact you've made peace with, the same way you've made peace with not being able to parallel park on the first try. But you got close enough to the answer to feel something shift slightly in your chest, a small, quiet recalibration, like adjusting a picture frame that's been slightly crooked for years, and you only just now noticed. The third $10,000 took 4 months. You know this because you happen to be paying more attention this time, not out of discipline, but out of a mild, growing curiosity, the way you'd keep glancing at a pot on the stove that you were pretty sure wasn't going to boil over, but you kept checking anyway, just in case something interesting happened. Something interesting did happen. It just happened slowly enough that it never announced itself. There was no single Tuesday you could point to, no stairwell moment this time. Just a Thursday where you happened to open the app for an unrelated reason, checking if a transfer had cleared, and noticed, almost as an afterthought, that the number had a new leading digit. Your friend Marco, who makes noticeably more money than you, and has a nicer apartment and a car that doesn't make the specific sound your car makes when it's cold outside, asked you once, almost defensively, how your investments were doing. You told him, honestly, the number. He was quiet for a second longer than felt normal for a casual conversation. Marco's retirement account, it turns out, has less in it than yours, despite him earning close to double your salary for the past 4 years. Not because Marco is bad with money in any dramatic sense. He's not buying yachts. He's not gambling. He just spends what comes in, roughly, and contributes when things settle down, which is a phrase that has apparently been true for 4 consecutive years, without ever actually becoming true. His apartment has a soaking tub. You think about the soaking tub sometimes, not with envy exactly, more the way you'd think about a meal you decided not to order. You don't say any of this to Marco, obviously, because that would be insufferable. And also because you get it. You get it because you were exactly one decision away from being Marco. The decision wasn't smart. The decision was mostly an accident of timing and a mild aversion to canceling automatic transfers. Here's a number that made you laugh out loud, alone, in your apartment, in a way that startled your cat. If your current rate of growth continues, roughly, accounting for market ups and downs, and the inevitable terrible year that always shows up uninvited like a relative at Thanksgiving, your fourth $10,000 will take somewhere around 2.5 months. 2.5 months. The same amount of money that once took 5 years of your actual, deliberate, occasionally painful effort will now show up in roughly the time it takes to finish a Netflix show and forget you were watching it, then start a different one out of guilt. This should feel like a bigger deal than it does. You keep waiting for the emotional payoff that movies promised you, the montage, the triumphant music, the moment you throw your laptop in the air. Instead, you just refreshed the app once on a Wednesday, saw the number, said out loud, to nobody, and went back to making a sandwich. The cat, unimpressed, went back to sleep. The part that's genuinely, quietly funny, if you let it be, is that nothing about your behavior changed in 5 years. You still transfer the same base amount. You still, on a bad week, briefly wonder if canceling it would be the responsible thing to do. You still get vaguely annoyed by two-factor authentication. You are, in every meaningful daily life sense, exactly the same person who set this up half a decade ago in a stairwell with mild dread and low expectations. The only thing that changed is time. Time did the actual heavy lifting here, which feels almost insulting to admit, given how much effort you put into the first $10,000 and how comparatively little effort the fourth one is going to require. It's the financial equivalent of training for a marathon for years and then finding out the last 5 miles are on a moving walkway. And somehow, that doesn't feel like cheating. It just feels like the part nobody warned you about. You don't tell people this story much, for the same reason you don't bring up dividends at engagement parties. It doesn't translate well into a sentence that sounds impressive. I set up an automatic transfer and then mostly forgot about it for 5 years. Does not have the cinematic energy of, I built an empire, or I turned $500 into $50,000 with one genius trade. It's boring. It was always going to be boring. The boring part was the entire mechanism the whole time, quietly doing its job while you were busy having an actual life. But you check the app sometimes now, not out of anxiety, the way you used to, but out of something closer to mild curiosity. The way you'd check the weather for a city you don't live in just because you're wondering what it's doing over there. The number moves. You didn't do anything today. You probably won't do anything tomorrow either. Danny texted last week asking what you're actually doing differently now. You thought about it for a minute before you answered. The honest answer was nothing. You told him that. He didn't believe you, which is fair, because 5 years ago, you wouldn't have believed you either. That, it turns out, was always the plan, even when you didn't know you had one.